Hi, this is Dari again at 3x Point. In this video, we will be looking at functions and the group by clause. This is where things begin to get very more interesting because we'll be writing our own code, and on purpose, I have not written some pre-written select statements or SQL statements, as you may call it. So I will be walking you through each of the code that we'll be writing in this video. So I'm going to bring up my slide as usual. In this session, we will be looking at some slides, and I want to introduce you to something called function. Now, for some of you who may have some programming background, or you've done some things in computing in the past, you would understand what function is, or from your mathematical background, you may easily be able to tell that a function is anything that returns a value based on an input. So what do we mean by that? We can create a function, or we can use some inbuilt functions and supply a value to it, and then it returns back to us a different value depending on what we're trying to do. And we need to understand the different types of functions so that we can appropriately use them for our own desire, for what we intend them for. So generally there are different types of functions. We'll be looking at the aggregate and the scalar functions. But something else I need to bring to your attention is that in SQL Server there are inbuilt functions that came just by installing SQL Server. You have some functions that are inbuilt, and there are also functions that you can create yourself. Those ones are the user-defined functions. We will not be going into user-defined functions in this series because this series is actually the basics. By the time we go into the advanced T-SQL, we will start looking at user-defined functions. But for now, you need to understand that we have aggregate functions and we have scalar functions. And what do we mean by aggregate functions? With aggregate functions, it returns single value based on calculated values in a column. Now, all those definitions, as usual, the way I like to do it, we will understand it better by the time we start demonstrating what we're doing. So if you don't understand this definition right now, that's okay. You will understand it by the time I show you some hands-on example. So I'll read again the definition that says it returns a single value based on calculated values in a column. So it means that when you have a table and then you put a column inside your function, it returns a different value based on the calculation that you put inside that function. And like I said earlier on, we'll see that in action. Illustration on scalar functions, because that's how you will best understand aggregate function by the time we go into that. So remember how I told you that we comment out things that we don't want SQL Server to be concerned about. Okay, so because getDate actually falls in the category of the exceptions that I was talking about, so let me bring it down while we start with things like length. Right, so if we did something like this, select length, and I specify my name in it, and if I run this, you can see that it returns to me 4. And what that means is len means length, right? So it returns the length of the characters inside the value or whatever I pass into the function. So you can see that if we go back into our definition of scalar function, you can see we said here that it returns single value based on the input value with some common exceptions. So remember I mentioned that getDate is an exception. So what it basically does is you pass in a value into it, and then when you run it, it brings back a value, just one value back to you. Now you may start wondering and start asking questions like, so why is this important to know? Well, you will see where this is actually being used in real life by the time we start treating some business cases, and you can see, you will be able to understand that it's very important to know how to use some of these inbuilt functions, scalar functions, right? So if we go into another one called round, and let's select from that. So put round. Okay. So what the round function does is, if you specify, let's say, a number, series of numbers to a decimal place. Yes. So let's say I have these numbers 23453.768895. Now it takes two uh, parameters, right? So the second parameter will be the to the decimal places you want it to round it up to. So let's say 1, for example. If I select this, you can see that now we have 23453.8, and all the rest are zeros. So what it does is, if I say 1, then the figure after the decimal point is what it will round up. So all these ones will be changed to 0. So the same way, if I said 2, you can see that it takes the second decimal place, and then the rest, it turns them into 0. If I said 3, let's see what happens. See, so don't forget that, generally speaking, when you round up like that, it takes into consideration if it is 5, right? So you round it up from .5, above. If it is below .5, then it rounds it down. So what do I mean by that? So let's say, for example, we take this back to 1, and what we had here was, let's say, 3 instead of 6. Okay, let me put the 6 back, and let's see what value we get. So here we have 23453.8, right? So if I did dot 7, change the 6 to 3, instead of dot 8, you would see that what we have is dot 7, because the 3 that I just replaced here is now up to 5. But if I said 5, you'll see that it would round it up to 8. If it was 4, it will round it down to 7. You see, so that's what it does. So you know what this means. It generally takes more than 2 parameters, but the third parameter is optional, and that's if you wanted to specify to the number of decimals you wanted. But in this case, this is the most important thing you need to understand, that you specify where you want it to round. Now there are some people who do things like this. Sometimes you see a situation where you see -1, and you start wondering, but isn't it supposed to take the decimal places after the figures after the decimal places and then decide to round up? Well, sometimes you might want to round it up, take all these ones, turn them to 0, and then use this, to round that up. So let's see, you see what I mean by that now. So you can see that the 3 that was here before has now been turned to 0, because I've said start the rounding from -1. So if I did -2, you would see that it'll keep going on and on like that. So it takes the 2 before the decimal places, and then it turns it into 0, and then rounds up the 1 before the 2. So if I did -3, you would see that it keeps going back like that. So you see it takes it off. Yeah, so that's generally all there is to round. If we go on to the next function, which is rand, so let's select rand function. And this is also part of the exception I was saying the other time, because run, generally speaking, you wouldn't pass anything to it, but that doesn't mean it won't bring back value to you if you pass something into it. So but let's just select it first without passing anything into it. So you can see that anytime you select it, it brings back random numbers. So I'll keep executing and you take note and see that it just brings back, several random numbers, you see. But if I want the number to be static, for example, I could just pass 1 into it, and you can see that it doesn't change. You see, it doesn't matter what figure I pass into it, it just remains static. But the moment I take the figure away, it keeps bringing several random numbers, right? So you can use this for a number of things while doing some development or analysis, depending on what sort of calculation that you intend to do. Okay, so moving on, let's take another one that has an exception to passing a value into it, which is the getDate function. And this getDate function is used a lot. You will be using this a whole lot. And what this does basically is it returns the current date and time from the server in which your SQL server is installed. So if let's say for example, you have the installation on a cloud server, which is in America, for example, and you're in London from a client machine connecting to the server, and you run this, don't be surprised that it doesn't bring back the date, the London date for you. It's only going to return to you the current date and time of the machine which SQL Server is installed on the cloud server. So you need to bear that in mind whenever you use this. So if I select get date and time, it's actually going to return the current date and time, and it has a precision to the nanoseconds. So you can see it's 2016 August 2006, and then that's the time, the second, and the fractional seconds. So each time I run this, you can see that the fractional seconds keep changing. And with getDate, you generally don't pass anything into it, because if you pass anything into it, let's say I'll pass this into it, you can see the red squeeze is already complaining. Or let's say I try to pass in a number into it, similarly it's complaining. So you can see the getDate function requires 0 argument. It doesn't require any argument at all. So it's just one of those functions in which you don't need to pass anything into it, but it returns a value for you. So let's check out the last one here. There are a number of them. There are not a lot of them, but I mean, whenever you intend to do these things, I'll recommend you consult books online. So to get to books online, all you need to do is just bring up Google, and I think I've showed this in one of my past videos. So you could just say T-SQL round, for example. So you can see that books online comes up first. So you can click on it and you will see how that works, and then you see the documentation of how it works right there. So I mean, I use that a lot for my work, so there's no harm in consulting Microsoft every time you want to work or you want to do things you're not sure about it. No one, even your boss at work, would not complain if you do that, because it's it's you're not expected to know everything by head, right? But the more you use it, some of them just stay with you because you use them more regularly, right? So that's the way it is. So let's go to power, and power takes now that's something interesting, because you can see that whenever I open the parentheses, you can see what we have there. It says expression, comma, power float. So that's to tell you it's expecting 2 arguments. So the first argument will be the expression, and then you will specify another value, which is going to be a float. So the first one, which is the expression. So the expression, let's say I want to do 2 to the power of 2, for example, and then I do a comma. So you can see that the boldness changes. You see, if I remove the comma, it goes back to expression to say that's the first one. If I put a comma, you can see that the power changes. And then if I put 3, or let me put 2, that's a simple mathematics, and close the parentheses, you can see that goes away. And if I select that, you can see that 2 to the power of 2 is 2, and 2 to the power of 3 is what? 8. If I did 3 to the power of 3, that should give us 27, I guess. Yes, that's it. So you can do a lot of calculation. Now, this is to tell you that, I mean, if you think about it, power as a function is actually running because something has been coded behind the within the operating system of SQL Server. So something has been coded to actually do this, which is to take in expression and the power and then do some calculation to it. So that is to tell you that you can also create your own functions to do similar things. So these ones are inbuilt functions. So you can also create your own functions. Those ones are the user-defined functions that can do things like this. So let's say you want some kind of custom calculation that does not exist within SQL Server. You can create your function and pass in values into it, and it brings back something to you, right? So this will take us into talking about the aggregate function. So I'm actually going to stop this video here, and then I will start a new video so we can talk about the aggregate functions from there. See you in the next video.